Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Orbit Live event with two outstanding fantasy authors. Nicholas Eames is the author of Kings of the Wild and the companion novel Bloody Rose, both of which are out now from Orbit. Andrea Stewart is the debut author of The Bone Shard Daughter, which will be published in September of this year. I'm excited to have them both with us virtually tonight. And there's a copy of The Bone Shard Daughter. Thanks, Nick. Throughout this event, Nick and Andrea will be answering your questions. I see several of you have already entered questions using the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. Keep them coming. You can also vote on your fellow audience members' questions so that the most popular ones get answered first. This event will be recorded and a replay will be available after it's over. If you aren't able to stay for the full event, you can watch that replay, and you can also share it with your friends or followers using the same link that you used to enter the event today. Follow Orbit Live on Crowdcast to be notified about upcoming events with more great authors. We're going to announce the authors who will be appearing next week and the week after very soon. And now I'm very happy to turn the event over to Nick and Andrea. Take it away, guys.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I think we'll just go ahead and start with the questions since it seems like there's quite a few already. So I'll just start with what's at top. So Nick, do you know your ending to your books and write backwards from that, or is it a process and the story reveals itself as you create/write?
Just before we start, any of these questions titled something someone called Nick's mom? Somebody crash the party. Well, for me, it depends on the book. With the first book, I had no clue. Except for the fact that I knew what the climax was right off the bat. I think anyone who reads past chapter 3 knows where the climax is going to be. And so I knew what was going to happen in the end. It was just a matter of going from A to Z and taking all the alphabet in between. And then with the second book, I thought I knew the ending before I started, and then I did not know it at all. And then with the third book, I know exactly how it's going to end, and so it's just a matter of, I just have no idea how it's going to begin.
So there will be a third book.
There will be a third book, yes. Yeah. I work on it for a long time, but still going. How about you?
So for me, I tend to know the ending to my books, and I do tend to kind of write backwards from there, just knowing where I want things to end and where I want the characters to be as far as like their emotional journey and their physical journeys if they're going from one place to another. What happens in the middle changes sometimes, though, just depending, because sometimes I'll have an outline and I'll think like, well, this is the best way to get them from feeling this way to realizing something over here. And then during the course of things, I realize that's actually not going to work. But yeah, I do tend to know the endings. That has changed on occasion, but usually I do.
Yeah, I see my mic levels are a bit messed up. I'm using the new microphone, and I tried unplugging it right before we started, and disaster happened. So I'm afraid we're stuck with it. I am sorry.
Okay, so here's the next question. So when creating your worlds and going through the world building process, how much do you draw from our actual world, real events, personal experiences, etc.? And how do you know when to draw the line between reality and fiction?
I said you start with this one.
Oh, okay. So I tend to make a lot of stuff up just because I enjoy doing that. I do draw some actual world stuff, like my world is Asian inspired, so I definitely drew on my experiences growing up, having a very exacting parent. That was something that I drew upon for my book. A lot of the food and everything is in there. I don't tend to put like real people or anything like that into my book. So even though I had an exacting parent, there's just nothing like the character that
isn't there.
It's like a little bit, but I'm not really. It's like, yeah. But yeah, I do tend to definitely draw on personal experiences. I mean, another of my characters is going through the whole grief process. So, that's something that I drew on definitely, and how strange it feels when you're going through that process. But I try not to draw directly, just because I feel like, there's a lot more to do with that. I mean, you don't have to, they say write what you know. And I don't think that they mean that directly. I think they mean that a little bit sideways.
Yeah, I'm kind of similar. I think, well, as far as my trying to put real life into my book, I probably did that with all the stuff I wrote before Kings of the Wild. So maybe got it all out of my system. So ultimately I just try to make the emotions and things like that and the characters as real as, as honest at least as possible. But a lot of my stuff is drawn from music, obviously. With the first book, it's kind of 70s, and the second book, it's kind of 80s, and the third book, it's 90s. So a lot of the character and the plot is dictated by the music of that era and what it was either trying to say or what it felt like. So in the first book, you do get a lot of, that journey, the rambling kind of adventure, which I would get when listening to like a Led Zeppelin song or something like that. And then with the second book, it's that destructiveness, that let's make everything louder than everything else. And then with the third book, it's a lot of kind of anger. And the 90s was a lot of either I don't give a shit or the people in power are corrupt, and I wouldn't know anything about that. So yeah, a lot of my stuff is kind of informed. It has to be informed by the music and what that kind of dictates just for the story I'm telling. Thank you for the question.
Actually, the next question is specifically for you, Nick, and it talks about music. So for Nicholas, music plays a huge part in your books. So far, it's been mostly rock and rock bands, but will you be drawing on other genres, and how will that be reflected in the characters?
I think not so much the characters. It's more just like kind of the setting. At least with the third book. With the first one, the people were very much like I said before, 70s rock, but they were supposed to represent people in a band. Like Gabriel, the main character, was the lead singer. Clay was the bassist. Gamon's the axe man, And then with the second book, it's more like each character in the band represents a genre of music. So Rose is kind of, punk rock, and Cure is literally the Cure. Bruin is metal. Tam is the Journey, anything by Journey and Stevie Nicks. So with the third book, it's a kind of a mix between a lot of grunge, and then at the early 90s at least, I'm kind of staying away from the late 90s because it was trash. It was all the music I liked growing up, but I shouldn't have. So a lot of like late 80s, early 90s hip hop and grunge and Rage Against the Machine, which there's a lot of groups I used to despise when I was a privileged white teenager that I thought, why would you brand me at the cops? And now I listen to it, and it resonates a lot more, and it's very, very, very inspiring music to write to.
Okay, so the next question is, how polished of a copy do you give to alpha/beta readers? The less polished it is, the more the odds are stacked against the book, but the sooner you'll be able to bail if it's fundamentally flawed. The more polished it is, the better received it will be. However, you may only have sunk more time into something that's fundamentally flawed. So
This will be a good one.
Yeah. So for me personally, I'm the kind of person that I am a perfectionist. So I definitely go ahead and give beta readers the most polished version that I can. Like, I'll work it over first before I hand it to anybody, because honestly, I think sometimes the first draft is a little bit unreadable. Mm-hmm. I've got like dropped plot threads and, characters that disappear. So I have to like go back and smooth all that stuff out, and I tend to polish at the same time. One of the things that I did modify, though, as I've written books over the years, is instead of just starting in on an idea that I think is good, I'll write up pitches for my ideas. and then run those past like my friends, my agent, and things like that, just so I can know whether or not my idea is good. And then once I know that, okay, well, everybody's saying this idea is really interesting, then I actually start writing it and then do the polish and then let people read it. Because nobody wants to read my first draft. They don't.
Who gets to read it first? Who are your beta readers?
Usually, like my friends, we all exchange books with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So other authors, basically. Yeah, that's who it tends to be.
Yeah. When does your husband get to see it? When it shows up on shelves?
He gets to see it when it's polished.
Yeah.
He's kind of like the person that he's got, like, for reading, he's got a short attention span. So I'm like, oh, if I've hooked him, then I did a good job.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So how about you, Nick?
Sorry, the light in my room just turned into like ancient Rome suddenly. So, I have two beta readers that get it pretty early. My brother and my best friend Eugene, and so they get to read. I mean, just like you, I tend to be a bit of a perfectionist, despite not producing perfection, and so I do really go over myself every single sentence, every single paragraph, multiple times, just as I'm writing it. And then, they get to look at it. Eugene can be a lot more critical. My brother is going to be a cheerleader about certain parts. He may like gloss over the parts he doesn't like, and maybe that's what I take as critique from him. But he'll definitely be the person that makes me keep a scene that I might be doubting deserves to be there. So, but yeah, and then when it comes to handing it over to like an editor, by that point, I like to think that it's pretty polished. I mean, I only have one example to go by, which is my second book. But I handed that thing in past deadline, and so I didn't get to go over as much as I would have liked. But once I got it back, I went over it again and again and again. I tend to nitpick until the very final minute.
Yeah, I mean, because it's going out in front of a bunch of people after that, right? So you really want to make sure. Okay, let's see. The next question. Regarding second thoughts, how do you proceed when after you wrote a scene and you have a whole different idea that may alter your entire story? You want to start with that?
Sure. I start from scratch, unfortunately. It has happened. It happened with my second book. I changed the gender of the main character about halfway through, and if anyone's ever tried it before, you can't just switch the she's to he or he's to she's, and there we go. It's a whole different, everything about the book is different. So I started from scratch, and then I was about 3/4 of the way done, and thought of a new beginning for it, basically, a new first 4 chapters, which informed so much of the character and what her life was like, and how she would react to every person around her, and that necessitated writing the entire book over again. So I kept all the events, but I rewrote every single scene for her, like to suit her. So yeah, I can really throw a wrench into things.
So for me, with second thoughts, I really like to keep up momentum. So if I come up with something that I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea, and I need to make it happen, but I'm like halfway through the book at that point, I just keep going and I change things from then on, just based on this idea that I've already fit. That's so future me can curse myself.
Yeah, that's a better way, I think.
Yeah, so then I'll put a note like, oh, well, this is something that I have to fix when I do my next draft, which is another reason why nobody wants to read my first drafts, because I have more of those than I should probably admit to. Let me see. Okay, this one's specifically for you, Nick. Saga was influenced by 70s rock bands and Fable by 80s bands, so will the band in book 3 have more of a rap group or grungy or other influence? Oh, some fun of music questions.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. Like I said, a lot of like I have a playlist for it that I haven't shared yet. So there's a playlist obviously on Spotify for the first 2 books, but the third one is still a work in progress. But yeah, it's as opposed to, you won't find any Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple on there. It's all NWO or Rage Against the Machine or Nirvana or the Foo Fighters. A lot of Nas. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on, no Backstreet Boys yet.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to fit a joke in there about them somewhere. But
Okay, so this question, how do you balance humor and darkness in your writing? Do you find that particularly easy / difficult to do? So for me, I think, I think like, I do have some humorous moments, but I mean, even in the dark moments in real life, I think that there's humor to be found. I'm sure everybody's seen some of the memes out there about so, I think it's just natural for people to find humor in the dark moments. So for me, it's just like, is it realistic for them to have no sense of humor at all? Probably not. But yeah, I think mine probably tends less toward humor and more towards darkness than Nick's book. So
yeah, way more towards darkness, I'd say. But you still have moments of like levity in there and moments of like heart to hearts and things like that I think work out really well, balance really well.
Yeah. So I think it's just a matter of just making sure that you're not making it all dark.
Yeah. And I think you're exactly right in that there is so much humor at dark times. I mean, I haven't been to a funeral where we haven't cracked jokes. I don't know what other people's families are like, but mine's awful. Just kidding. But yeah, so like I tend to deal with tragedy sometimes with humor. I think a lot of the world does, as evidenced by Twitter these days. And so yeah, it's just a matter of trying not to let for me at least, while writing the funny parts, because I'm intentionally trying to be funny, try not to let those get so ridiculous that they overshadow the poignancy, which I often need an editor's help to tell me, you've gone overboard here. So sometimes, sorry, go ahead.
I thought it balanced well in the end. It was good. Yeah,
I took their advice 90% of the time, except for a couple Moog scenes that I was like, sorry, this has to go. This has to stay. Yeah.
Okay, let me see. So this is semi-related. How do you write emotional scenes that don't come across as corny? If you want to start that one off.
Yeah, that can be a tough one. I think ultimately it comes down to practice. I mean, not always, because certainly there's some writers that just come out of the gate and nail it. But for me, at least, it took me a long time to write scenes, not just really emotional scenes, but just really someone walking into a room where it wasn't way too wordy or way too ostentatious or way too grand. Sometimes someone just needs to pick something up and eat with it or something, They don't need to deliver the food onto their mouth hole. So, yeah, I think just practice and revision and listening, most importantly, listening to, anyone that knows better when it comes to them reading your book. And if they find something too difficult to grasp or comprehend or too corny, then they're probably right and you should change it.
For me, I feel like that was also something that I had a little more difficulty with when I was first starting off writing. I overused tears. I keep crying all the time. They're just so emotional. Because when you think about it, I mean, people can have these really deep and emotional internal thoughts, and they're not necessarily, sobbing on the floor, even though they might feel like it. So I think that oftentimes it's like one of those things where, it's like salt, you don't want to overuse it.
Exactly, yeah.
It's very appropriate sometimes to have your characters, you know, sobbing on the floor, but not all the time. Basically.
It's funny you say that because Eugene has said to me, enough with the tears. People have to stop crying. But I think it's because you get so invested. Like when you're writing the scene, you're writing it for 2 days maybe. So you're emotionally invested in it, where someone reading it just is, they saw tears 2 pages ago.
Yeah, they may not be as into it as you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a balance, and also like keeping in mind what the character is not just going through emotionally at that time, but also like what they're trying to accomplish. So sometimes, you know, we put like those feelings aside a little bit so we can, you know, do whatever it is that we're trying to do and our goals. And I think for the emotional scenes, I try to put it in more of like that lull, that quiet time. Because I think if you try to put it in too much, that's like when you get into that overwrought writing.
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah. Oh, this one's a good one too. Since both of you either have written or are working on a second book now, how much is the process different from writing a first book? Okay, so I am the one working on my second book right now. It's different in the sense that I have not written as many second books as I have first books. So I feel like I definitely had a lot more experience writing first books and knowing how to like set the stage and set up certain conflicts to carry out through next books and set up conflicts that are going to be resolved in book one. The second book, I definitely feel like I'm kind of wrestling with a whole bunch of tangled yarns. I'm like, okay, so I have this stuff from book one, and I need to get it over here to book 3. But like, how do I weave these together so it actually looks like a story and not just like a knot?
Yeah.
So that
doesn't get slipped along the way.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting process. It's I mean, because book 2 has to, especially if you're writing a trilogy, book 2 has to act like a bridge, also be a story, and you really don't. I think especially when you're a debut author, you don't want to be like one of those like, oh, like sophomore slump. The second book's not as good. So I think there's a little bit more anxiety attached to that as well, at least for me.
No, I feel exactly the same. I mean, writing Bloody Rose, it came out. My first book came out when I was relatively close to the beginning Bloody Rose, or about halfway through, but yeah, it takes a toll mentally on you, not only because you have so many other kind of duties to keep up on suddenly, but you have a lot of pressure on you, and whether it's the good reviews or the bad reviews, they both get to you. And I used to just pray for those bad reviews, and I'd read it and I'd think, oh, here's somebody I won't have to worry about disappointing next time around because they already hate it. But yeah, and it can like, I thought I was a pretty like stable emotional person, but holy cow, writing that second book really put me through the ringer sometimes. Because there's just so much. I didn't have like the problem that you have with where you've got to keep those threads going to the third book necessarily. I've got a few. My God, I look like Edward Cullen from Twilight here. I have a few threads that are continued throughout, but otherwise I'm kind of starting a new story every time. So that I think maybe comes with its own challenges. That sometimes I wouldn't mind hitting the ground running, but at the same time, it can be both a blessing and a curse just to be able to start over and write a whole new first book again, you know?
Right.
With just a few of the threads going.
Yeah, I'm sure that people still expect like callbacks though to the first book and everything.
Yeah, and ultimately there will be like the things that happen in the first book, you know, they shape the world of the second book, and the things that happen in the second book shape the world of the third book in major ways that I sure as heck didn't plan from the beginning. So yeah, it's. Yeah, time for a
Okay.
few more questions.
Yeah. Okay. So this one. Both of your books have a bunch of characters. Do you have favorite characters whose stories you're impatient to get back to? What do you do when you find that you're more interested in one character's story than another? So, Nick, if you want to take that one away.
Sure. I actually had written this down as a question for you, though, because I'm looking forward to your answer on this one. With mine, both my books are single character point of views, so I'm stuck in their heads. When it comes to favorite character, I'm really torn between my main character, who I usually intensely empathize with. Clay Cooper, obviously, as a dude that's growing older, I can relate to that. And then with Tam, just trying to get into her head. She's probably the closest to my heart character that I've ever written. And so they're definitely my favorite, but when it comes to writing, there's a character in each book. It's Moog in the first book, and then a character named Roderick in the second, and then there's a character named Short Knife in the third that is basically like my say anything character, so that whatever joke comes up, whatever ludicrous thing you want to have happen, they're the person that can be the vessel for that, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But they're always fun to write because they can kind of bring a sense, or bring something surprising to every scene.
So for me, I had like 5 point of view characters in book 1, and so far there are 5 point of view characters in book 2. I don't know that I have a favorite. That's so hard it's like picking a favorite child, right? I mean,
my mom did, easy.
But it's just I definitely feel like I enjoy writing them all fairly equally. If I really, really had to choose, I mean, I like Jovis in a lot of ways just because he's got like kind of the same flippant sense of humor that I do, and he also like thinks himself funny at times when maybe he shouldn't. So he laughs at his own jokes. He's like that kind of person.
Despicable.
I know, it's terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that it's important for me at least to find something really interesting driving each of these characters so that I don't feel like I'm less interested when I'm writing one of them over the other, because I feel like a reader might be able to sense that a little bit. If you're less invested as the author in writing a scene, then I think that sometimes would bleed through. So for me, I definitely I enjoy all of them, which I know is a cop-out, but there it is.
That's okay. That's a pretty good answer. Can I ask one of my questions then, if we have lots of time?
Sure.
Basically, I just wanted...
Oh, sorry.
Because I had listened to another interview with you, and you had kind of talked about your rocky road to getting published, and I thought that it was something that people would be really interested to hear, because I know I told like so many people, I was like, oh my God, you got to hear what this girl went through to get this book out in the world.
Yeah, it was a lot. So I first started trying to get published back in, I think it was 2007 or 2008. That's when I'd had a completed book that I was like, oh, like you start out, you're like so starry-eyed. It was like after college, and I was like, oh, I finished my book, and I'm going to sell it for so much money. It's going to be so great.
This is it. Yeah.
This is it. I finished a book, and you think that's like the hardest part, and it's not. So that's like the first book that I queried. I did not get an agent with that, so I wrote another book. And I started querying that, and I wrote another book while I was querying that one. And I mean, suffice to say, I wrote like 7 books. This was the 7th book that I wrote before I actually got something published. So I did get an agent, and then the first, the book that that got my agent with, that we sent out, and it did not sell. Nobody was interested. I wrote another book. Same experience. So then I wrote another book, which happened to be this book. And yeah, then things started happening. I mean, I wouldn't recommend doing that. I think like I definitely learned stuff at least from each iteration. Like I knew from my agent's feedback that I had like a problem facing with those first 2 books that went out on sub. So I was like, you know what? Damn it, I'm going to fix that problem. I'm going to make this one better, which I think I succeeded with. But yeah, it was a lot of books and a lot of time. So it was 2007, I think, when I first started that whole thing. And then 2019 when I sold something.
Wild.
Yeah. But how about you? I was kind of curious too, like, because I'm always curious about people's path to publication and they got to where they are.
Anyone who's heard the story before is going to be like, please don't tell it. But I'll keep it brief. I basically wrote it kind of like you, except it took me the same amount of time, but I just wrote one book over and over. And so it was this giant, monstrous book that I started. I think when I was 25 years old. I'd written other stuff before that, but that's when I got super serious. And I wrote it, and then it was about 300,000 words or more.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. I was reading the wrong kind of stuff, and I was out of it. And I rewrote it a couple times, and I submitted it to agents and got rejected. And then a lot of them were like, this is way too big. So I split it in half and took the first half and rewrote that again so it felt like a regular book, and then sent that out to agents. And while that was getting rejected is when I wrote Kings of the Wild. So that was probably 12 years though of I was doing other stuff. I was working, but I was slowly but surely plugging at the other book. So it took me a while. And if you had told me like 10 years into writing another book that it wouldn't be the one to get me published, I would have lost my mind.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. But then when it came to getting an agent, it was also I kind of lucked into it too, because I was working in a restaurant at the time and just happened to see, I had read a book called Trader's Blade by the author Sebastian de Castell, who lived in Vancouver, and I knew that. And I saw de Castell on the reservation list, and I'm like, can you put this guy in my section just in case he's this author that I just read? And so sure enough, it was him. It was his wife's birthday. And when I went up to him and I was just like, hey, just so I'm a big fan, blah, blah, blah. And we got talking. I'm like, oh, I'm writing a book too. And, stupid. But eventually I ended up seeing it again at a writers' festival a few months later, and he was super gracious, asked me how things were going. I was like about halfway through Kings of the Wild at that point. And then I came back into the restaurant when I had finished it, and I had an agent on the hook that ended up saying no. But then that agent said no. He kind of knew who that agent was and was like, okay, this book must not be garbage. So he passed it on to his agent with no promises attached, obviously, and his agent is now my agent. So it was definitely, I owe a lot to that restaurant, that's for sure.
It's a really cool story, though.
Yeah, which is why that restaurant's name is the name of the band in the second book. It's called Fable.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. What other questions do we have here? Okay, so, how do you motivate yourself to do the countless edits I've heard authors talk about for their books? So you asked me questions. You go ahead and start this one, Nick.
God, once it gets to the editing phase, I think that's pretty easy. Like I said before, I do get pretty nitpicky about it, and I've just been kind of lucky so far that my edits haven't been hugely, except for the edits that I've done mid-book that have necessitated changing the whole book. Once I've done it, there hasn't been any huge edits like that. With the first book, though, they did ask me to add 50,000 words. It was only 90,000 words, a sleek little 90,000 word book, and so I added, in the end, about 40,000 words to it. Like the bad guy last leaf didn't exist in the copy that got sold. I couldn't even imagine, honestly, the book without him or all the stuff that I added, so I'm glad it happened. But yeah, when it comes to editing, I really, really enjoy it, just because the hardest part, the writing, for me at least, is done. And for me, it's just you get a chance to perfect all those lines that you thought you nailed the first time and actually didn't. And you just get a chance to kind of smooth everything out over and over and over. And I really, really like it.
So for me, it's actually kind of the opposite. I enjoy the process of writing much more than I like editing and revising.
Yeah.
I've always found that really difficult. although it's one of those things that I'm realizing it's never as difficult as I think it's going to be. And so motivation is always the problem, is getting started on those things. I think having deadlines right now is very motivating. So that's helpful. And I wouldn't recommend this, but I'm always kind of joking about it, but not really. Thinking about how I'm going to die someday, and is this really how I want to be spending my time, is procrastinating. So
Interesting. I'll try that.
yeah, so it's a little bit of the existential dread, which I find like, okay, well, I got to just actually sit down and start it. And once I do, it's not as bad. I always find the large revisions to be the hardest ones to get motivated on, because it's like, well, I thought I was done with this. I'm actually really far from done with it. The smaller edits, those are fine. Those are easy to get going on, but it's the bigger stuff. You're just like, oh my God, I have to like break my story again in order to fix it. And that's always a little bit daunting, I think.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that. I think I see a lot of people talk about their edit letters with a sort of, like you said, dread. So I think maybe it's because I put myself through the ringer before that. But yeah.
Okay, so when writing dialogue, how do you both go about making sure it sounds natural and that all of the characters involved in a conversation sound distinct from another? For example, reading it aloud. So Nick, what do you do?
I definitely read it out loud. I read it aloud to myself, and I also put it, as I'm editing it, I put it onto a Kindle just so that it looks like a real book. And I find that way it enables me to be more critical about it than me looking at it on the page. But when it comes to writing dialogue that feels realistic, yeah, it definitely takes some trial and error. I'll write some scenes and then go back and be like, oh my God, nobody would say that. And obviously when you're dealing with a bit more some tropey moments, like, when you're trying to write like anything that involves, a confession of love or a speech, a pre-battle speech, how do you approach one of those and be like, okay, how do I not make this so corny? And so, yeah, it's just a matter of rewriting it over and over and over. And yeah, I think once you get a handle of the characters, though, when you go back and do your edits, that those characters are more firmly entrenched in your head, and it's easier to find their voice and make them distinct from one another.
So for me, it's kind of like a little bit of a joke that, well, I gave the book to my mom to read after it had sold, and she had a lot of praise for it. She said it was very imaginative, and she thought the plot was really great. And then my mom's always got a but when so she's like, but you need to work on your dialogue. So
wow. Harsh critic, Mom.
Yeah, but I think it's something that I've been actually thinking about. I'm like, maybe she's got a point. But I do the same kinds of things that Nick does, where I'll go over it, obviously more than once, just to kind of see how it sounds. Sometimes I'll read it out loud. But I always feel really silly doing that. But I have in the past. And yeah, definitely the emotional scenes, I think those are ones that I have to go over multiple times just to make sure that I'm not overdoing it and that it is something that somebody would actually say. I also listen in on a lot of people's conversations sometimes. Like if you're at a coffee shop and oh, it's kind of interesting, the little vocal tics that different people have.
Yeah.
People do not speak grammatically most of the time. So that's something that I, try to make sure that I reflect in dialogue. And I think as far as making everybody's voice distinct, it's kind of just keeping in mind, for me anyways, who they are as a person and their background and how they would speak. For example, if they're coming up from the streets, then they would definitely have a different manner of speaking than somebody that's been raised in a palace. they just have a different frame of reference completely. So let me see. Okay, what is your process like? Plotting, dancing, or in between?
You can start this one.
Okay, so I am definitely a plotter. I start out with an idea and then I kind of write up like a pitch for it. That's what I was talking about earlier, where, I'll have something that sounds like kind of catchy and just to see, does the idea like work as a pitch? And then from there, I'll go ahead and like write maybe a chapter or two and just kind of get a feel for what is the world like? What does it feel like? What do the people feel like? And then once I feel like I kind of nailed down the feel of it, that's when I do a chapter by chapter outline. So if I have multiple POVs, I'll basically just break it out into POV, like, oh, this POV, this is their chapters, and that's like their arc. And this POV, this is their chapters and their arc, and so on and so forth until I've addressed all of them. And then I use Scrivener. So I have them on my little note. Yeah, so I have a little summary for each chapter on a note card, and then I'll move those around until it kind of makes sense, like chronologically and everything too, and like where the characters are interacting and what's happening in the world. And then I just start writing, basically. And this stuff does change. Like I'll have to be like, oh, like I have to add a chapter, crap, or this is going in a different direction. I need to change this stuff later. But that's my general process for that.
I remember hearing that you used Scrivener and thought for the millionth time, maybe I should give that a shot.
That was me like 2 years ago. So
yeah, and it works well for you?
Oh, it's great. I would highly recommend. Yeah, and I'm like a Luddite like that. I was like always just like just a Microsoft Word and yeah.
Interesting. Do you have to switch to Microsoft Word for the edits or no?
I do it in Google Docs actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can access it on my phone. So if I'm like, bored or online, or I could just like do some stuff on there. So.
Wow, good for you. Well, maybe I'll give it another shot one of these days. When it comes to me, I'm definitely a pantser, making things up as I go along. I'll occasionally, come up with a couple arcs, but otherwise. I feel that, at least so far, my books have been they're relatively simple. They are, in essence, like a journey from one place to the next. Sometimes they get sidetracked, but especially because sometimes you know where it's going to go, you want to be, for me at least, I wanted to keep things as exciting and surprising on the way as possible. So with Kings of the Wild, at least, I would write 2 chapters and think, okay, as a reader, what do I think is going to happen next? And then whatever I thought was going to happen next, I would try to make it something else. And things like, obviously I threw things like airships in there. They help a lot because you can suddenly you thought you were going to go on a journey to this place and suddenly that journey is going to be done in like a day. Or you thought the journey was going to be done into a day and then you just crash and suddenly the journey is going to be the next half of your book. So, I kind of like to surprise myself and hopefully in the end you end up with something cohesive that makes a lot of sense and seems like you planned it from the very beginning. But I would really like to be more of an outliner, or at least your way, where you get a feel for the characters and then do a solid outline.
Yeah, it's not as great as it sounds sometimes, though.
Yeah, when I got near the end of Bloody Rose, when I was trying to rewrite it and didn't have very long to rewrite it, I basically got this giant piece of Bristol board, made however 58 squares because I knew that there was going to be approximately that many chapters, and then wrote the title of each chapter and what was going to happen in every single chapter. It was just this massive mess. I also put dates beside it as to when I thought I was going to be done that, and that didn't happen. But I have that Bristol board, and I'll probably keep it forever just because it's a reminder of you can pull something out of this absolute mess that things seem like when you're in the midst of it.
Okay, so this one. If you could visit your own fictional world for a day, would you? And what would you want to do there? So, Nick, you want to take that away? Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, it depends in which book you visited. Obviously, the easy answer is like taking a show, see Bloody Rose live somewhere, maybe. Yeah, it'd be pretty fun. Otherwise, yeah, just seek out Moog and pick his brain, see what happens.
It would be something very interesting, I'm sure.
Here's hoping. I may never get out of that world, actually.
So for me, I would definitely visit. And I would just go and eat a bunch of street food. But that's like basically what I do when I travel, is I like to go and find some hole in the wall places and eat the food there, or go to their like market or grocery store and kind of just see how different it is from the US, which is, it's usually quite different. But yeah, I would have a fun time doing that, I think. And then I would be like avoiding all the bad things, I hope.
Yeah, at first it's a great question. I was like, who wouldn't visit their world? But then there's actually tons of authors that write just horrific worlds that they would be like, hell no, I would be dead in an hour or so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we could both survive in our own worlds for at least a day.
You would hope. You'd hope we would know enough to be able to
navigate.
Okay, so this one's specifically for you, Nick. How hard was it to write the rooftop scene in Bloody Rose?
I assume that's the scene at the very end, or close to the very end. Rooftop. I'm trying to think if there's any other ones. It wasn't really, honestly. That is a scene that I've been thinking of. So there's certain scenes in my books that I think that I know before I even start writing them, or the whole way through. Like the climax of Kings of the Wild, I would listen to Free Bird by Leonard Skinner on my way to work every day, and I had that thing planned out like months and months and months ahead of time. And the same goes for that rooftop scene. The song there's a song called Together in Bloody Rose that Tam kind of sings a couple times as one of her mom's songs. And the real life version of that is this is One by U2, which is, there's a really beautiful live version of One where the crowd sings along most of the song. And so I used to listen to that song. It would be on my playlist while I was walking to work or doing whatever, and I would just imagine that scene over and over and over. So when it came time to write it, it was just done.
Okay, let's see.
Thank you for the question.
How do you write friendships in your books? Okay. Like trying to think.
We have a blossoming friendship between Jovis and Mephi.
Yeah, that's definitely, it doesn't start until a bit later, and at first Jovis is very reluctant to be friends with him. I think it's just like any kind of other relationship where you have the interplay between the two characters, and they kind of get to know one another, and through that they form like an emotional closeness and an emotional bond. And part of that too, I think, is like having a character, like put neck out for another one. I think that's like a way that friendships sometimes form. And then you kind of like banter and stuff. Friends usually don't just aren't just always propping each other up. Like, you give each other a hard time too, I think, definitely. So, but yours, Nick, has much more of a strong friendship element than mine does.
Yeah. Your characters, a lot of them, your POV characters, don't meet each other until, if not, maybe never, and sometimes, they're almost at odds with each other a lot of the time.
Yeah.
With me, I was definitely relying on existing examples. Like, I was relying on looking at bands that had existed in the 70s. Like, you look at the Rolling Stones, those people are as close to one another as they are to their families, if not closer, in Keith Richards' case. And there's just a bond that forms between people that go on the road and endure the stuff they endure, the mental and physical hardship of especially like touring back in the old days. And and I think that just gets even more amplified by when you're putting your life on the line in like a mercenary, setting. And so yeah, with my first book, it's all everything's hunky dory. Everyone's good friends. They've already had the fights and had the rough patches between them, and it's almost like them coming back together. Whereas in the second book, it's a bit rockier. And I'm sure I get a lot of people say, certain characters are hard to like in that second book, and I'm like, well, if you had toured with Axl Rose during the 80s, you probably wouldn't think what a swell guy he is. I really like him as a person. You may admire what he did, but he was probably a dick. So with the third book, it's friendships as well, but hopefully even rockier. Hopefully I can pull off something even rockier, but still manages to be cohesive in the end.
Okay, so this next one, this is an interesting one. Best and worst pieces of writing advice you've received.
What do you think?
I think writing advice is one of those things where you always take it with a grain of salt, and there's a huge survivorship bias. So, one author may say, oh, this is what worked for me, is, talking to an author that came into my restaurant, and that's how I got an agent. But that's not going to work for everybody. So
yeah, only works 50% of the time. I don't recommend it, everyone. Don't count on it.
I think personally, the best piece of advice has always just been about persistence, because I think the industry is really difficult to break into, and you kind of have to knock your head against that wall a lot and develop that resilience to be able to do that. The worst piece of writing advice, I don't know if there's so much a worst piece of writing advice so much as there's advice that you don't want to take completely 100%. There's advice I think is good, like things like, try not to use too many adverbs and show don't tell and all that kind of thing. But those are things that also, once you understand what you're doing, you can just throw those out the window basically, because you're doing it for a reason. So I think those are always good things to keep in mind when you're starting out, but to not adhere to those too strictly, I think. Yeah.
No, I feel the same way, especially when it comes to show don't tell. My God, if someone asked me to explain what it meant, I'd be like, whoa, and I would just bumble my way through it because I really don't get it. But it's one of those things that you just get or you don't. And I think practice helps. And the same goes for adverbs. I learned what an adverb was during COVID. I could not have told you what it was beforehand, having written 2 books. Didn't exactly know, anyways. So yeah, those things aren't really that important. Yeah, as far as when it comes to certain structure things, maybe I would say I can't say I've gotten any bad writing advice either, because as you said, it's also what applies to one person does not apply to everyone else. As far as good writing advice, persistence is obviously key. I think in both our cases it shows, whether we're plugging away on one book and it requires, my God, here's one. Don't expect the first thing you write to be the thing that gets published. And once again, there's plenty of exceptions to this rule, plenty of phenomenal exceptions to this rule, especially lately. But yeah, look at us. Andrea wrote so many books.
It helps not be too starry-eyed.
Yeah, and got that agent, and I used to think, as soon as I got the agent, that's it. You're set. And that's not always the case. And for me, it was a matter of I thought that I had learned enough that I could hammer that book into something that would get published, and I couldn't. It just wasn't. Its bones were too fragile. It could not withstand, the scrutiny. So it was learning to let something go, consider it a learning process, and embrace a new idea, I think is what I think that worked for me.
Okay, this one is specifically for me. So for Andrea, the bone shard magic system seems rather unique. Where did you get the idea for it, and how did it develop during the writing process? So this one actually started in a really weird place. So my friends were at San Antonio Worldcon. That was like a long time ago. And my friend Marina Lossetter, who's actually another author and amazing, um, she had gotten some food and found like a shard of bone in it, where there was not a shard of bone. I was like, like what if bone shards equal magic? So that's kind of how the whole idea started.
How stoned were you at this point? I'm just kidding.
So I was like, I told her I owe her some good Chinese food because she'd gotten it at some Chinese food place in a food court.
Wow.
But from there, I kind of like just thought about the idea, and I knew I wanted to have constructs in there. And then I knew that those were going to be powered by these shards. And then I started thinking, well, how do they know what to do? So I thought, well, they had to have some commands. And that's when I started thinking about like software programming and how that works. So I definitely drew some inspiration from that. Like when I was writing it, I would, my husband's a software programmer. So I'd be like, oh, so like, like I know sometimes like you have these things where you're like, oh, I think this is going to work, but there's some kind of like bug in the system, or you think that, the way that you've written it is going to work this way, but then it doesn't. So I would like ask like, so if I did this, would that kind of like make sense logically? So that's kind of like how it developed from that first like story idea into a whole magic system.
Well, it worked. It's incredibly unique, and you're right. It seems so similar to programming, and if you switch one thing, will it break another thing? I found that fascinating.
Yeah, and then it's fun to have like people try to break it too.
Yeah.
Should we take a couple more questions? Let me see. This is an interesting one. Hey, Andrea. Hi, Nicholas. Since becoming part of the publishing industry, do you find that you read differently? And if so, how?
You want to start with this one?
You start this one.
Yeah, I definitely do. You've got sometimes I would call it pressure on you to read a lot of books, which at first I was bad at saying no, and now I'm much better at saying no. I just don't have time because holy God, my bookshelf is just out of control, and yeah, I always do read pretty critically. I think I always did, and I've seen a lot of authors, you read stuff and you can be absolutely in awe of how a sentence was put together, and then, or sometimes be like, maybe I would have phrased that differently, but I never judge a book harshly because of that, and I tend to I'm pretty active on Goodreads, and I rate almost every one book I read very highly because I kind of want to read things that I know I'm going to like. You get kind of choosy, I think, and yeah, once you know, how much work goes into writing any book. My God, I used to be so judgmental about spelling errors in books, so judgmental, and now I just know that it doesn't matter how many people look at it, they're going to have at least 10, at least. Yeah. It just happens. I don't know how it gets by everybody, but it does. And so, yeah, I've always been pretty critical. I definitely would never, ever nowadays go on to Reddit and if I don't like a book, I just shut the hell up about it. I would never say anything derogatory in public about it anymore. And maybe I would have once, but I never will again. Only because, unless the book was a really problematic piece of shit. But
right.
If it's just not my cup of tea, it's not my cup of tea, and I know that books are so subjective. So
right, and then you don't know who you're offending, right?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's the editor really liked it, and yeah.
Exactly. And to be honest, having gone through it, I know how sometimes fragile your psyche can be when you're trying to create something else, and people are judging what you've already created, and so I don't want to stomp all over someone's emotional well-being.
That's very kind of you. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I definitely read things a little bit differently. Definitely with a more of a critical eye, but also with an eye to things that I really enjoy. So if I'm reading something and I'm really like hooked, or there's a scene that particularly tickles me, I'll like try to figure out what it is about that scene that really like made it like a reader cookie kind of thing, and I keep that in the back of my head. Oh, maybe I should do something similar to that in like an upcoming book, or things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that it's good to read critically, but I think it's also good to keep in mind the things that you really enjoy too. Should we take maybe one more
Great
question?
question.
Okay. Um, okay, this is an interesting one. What's a trope you want to reconstruct or deconstruct?
Hmm.
Hmm.
I mean, I've used every one of them under the sun, pretty much. You know, the wizard, the warriors, the stuff like that, the adventuring party. Uh, yeah, I don't know if I necessarily want to reconstruct or deconstruct any of them. I just kind of enjoy, you know, I'm one of those people that, like, when it comes to movies or books, I'm like, you should never consider what's come before. I'm not saying you should plagiarize or anything like that, but always write as if you're the first person to ever write that kind of scene or write that story. And don't worry about whether someone's done it before, because you're going to do it in your own unique way. You're going to tell that battle speech. You're going to write that fight scene. You're going to, navigate that heart to heart differently than any other author will. So, um, yeah, and like, unless just the characters are absolutely wooden, then I think using tropes is just a fantastic thing. And tropes are tropes for a reason. Like, I'm all for seeing brand new things in book. Like, my God, your magic system, obviously, that ain't no trope. But I enjoy using tropes. I
Oh
don't need to
yeah,
deconstruct them.
I think tropes definitely have their place. There is like a, I mean, there's a trope that I'm kind of interested in deconstructing over my next two books, which is, when you have like the evil regime and everything, and often the end is like you've toppled it, and yay, everything is better now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is lovely, and I think it's great, but I know that things are so much more complex and complicated than that. So I really wanted to kind of deconstruct that and think about, well, what happens next? What kind of like after effects are you dealing with from that corrupt regime, and like how do you actually make things better, and how do you like avoid repeating those mistakes, and
Mm-hmm.
also make things better in a way that satisfies people, because if you've had this corrupt regime, people often want things to change overnight, and it doesn't really work like that. You kind of have to do a lot more work. So that's something that I'm hoping to deconstruct over my next two books. We'll see.
Yeah, you definitely set it up for it.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think we're over on time now. Is this where we end?
Yeah, is there any questions left in the queue? Or
There's two more. Should we try to just go ahead and answer,
I,
or just real quick?
I could do them if you want. I'll try to be
Yeah,
brief.
sure. I mean, we're in a pandemic. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, there are lots of books on craft and story structure. Did you find any of them particularly helpful?
Nope. Bye. Just kidding. Yeah, no, I haven't read any books on craft or story. Nor did I go to school for it. I just kind of just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. So I'm sure they're very helpful, but I haven't read them yet. I did, however, recently read a book called Understanding Comics, because I wanted to look into maybe writing graphic novels one of these days, and it was a phenomenal book, and it's written like a comic book, and it was a masterpiece.
Mhm.
Understanding Comics.
I'll have to
You?
look that one up. For me, the only
Very
one
good.
I've read is Save the Cat, which I think was pretty helpful, actually, just in kind of forming a connection with the character and story structure. Um, It's actually like a screenwriting book, but yeah, the one that you said was a comics book, and I said a screenwriting book. But I do think that it's still applicable to novels. Okay, so last question. Prose can make or break a book. How do you balance cool/elegant metaphors and voice without tipping over into self-indulgence?
Oof, that's a great question. Do you want to go first?
Sure. This is one of those things that I sometimes like I'll put in a metaphor and I'm like, yeah, it's great. And then I'll go back and I read it and I'm like, what was I even trying to say? I just made this more complicated. So I think that finding the right metaphor, finding something that is cool and elegant is really difficult. Sometimes it happens on the first go and you're just like, yeah, it's wonderful. Sometimes I have to sit and think about it for a while. I do think that it's important to try to use metaphors that are world relevant and character relevant. Different characters are going to compare things to different things and think about things differently. And also world relevant ones are going to kind of flesh out your world a little bit more and make it feel a little bit more real. But yeah, I definitely try not to overuse those. Sometimes I will go back and take them out because I have overdone it.
Yeah, I too can be guilty of writing too flowery a paragraph or something like that. I do like to throw them in there. My whole first book was literally all flowery paragraphs. I was trying to write like God Gave You Okay, and it didn't end up so well. And yeah, exactly what you said. As far as when you're coming up with an analogy or stuff like that, it's you gotta write them like honestly. Like I think I saw Joe Abercrombie said something like that. Like his mom read his book and was like, "Did the moon really look like that? Like, or the stars really look like jewels sparkled across a black felt tapestry?" And he's like, "No." So it's true. I often will look at my metaphors and think, "Does that make sense?" And yeah, you just got to kind of pass them with a critical eye.
Rein them in a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it.
Thank you so much, everyone who dropped by and asked a question or just watched. We really appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for coming, and those were really great questions that made me think. So, yeah.
And thank you, Andrea, for joining me.